You clicked on this video because you wanted to know how America now owns Britain, and I'm about to tell you exactly why. I'm mainly looking at big tech, I'm mainly looking at multinationals, and I'm mainly looking at private equity. We call this thing the special relationship. It's really not. I mean, we say special relationship, almost as if we're on the same level as America. But the tragic thing is, guys, we're not on the same level. And in this video, I'll be taking you through the journey. How Britain started off as a fairly respectable country and ended up as essentially a vassal state. Much of a reading today is based on the book Vassal State by Angus Haddington. If you haven't already, do go check it out. It's a really great read. Before we dive into it, do make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. World Order covers all things geopolitics, macroeconomics, and tech. I also do the World Order red and black labels for those looking for more highly produced forms of storytelling, so do go check those out once you're done with this one. Without further ado, let's dive into it. You could date the story back to World War II, the end of World War II, when Britain basically called it quits on its empire, signed the loan deals with America, and then America kind of took the world from there. Okay, what used to be Britain's world order turned into America's world order, and Britain hasn't been the same since. The 50s, 60s, and 70s are genuinely regarded as a bit of a dark time, and I'm going to start this story in the 1979/1980 when Margaret Thatcher first comes into power. You have to understand just how ruthless Thatcher was with much of a working class in Britain. Britain went for a really rough period during the 1970s. Having once been the most powerful country in the world, Britain was now falling behind rivals like America and Australia when it came to coal mining, for example. You know, the Americans and Australians could start mining coal in open mine pits for much cheaper and much quicker, and it was so much more accessible to do it there, more safe as well. At the same time, you've got people getting into unions in Britain and demanding more pay for certain professions that just aren't feasible and aren't profitable anymore. And this was happening not only with the miners, but people working in steel, people working in textiles, people working in shipbuilding. Britain, once having been the greatest steel producer in the world, you know, Germans gave us a bit of a run before World War I, but other than that, and maybe the Americans, but other than them, Britain was the greatest producer of steel. Come the freaking 1970s, you got places like Japan and Germany, which had actually rebuilt themselves after World War II, just because we destroyed them so badly. They rebuilt themselves, and when they rebuilt themselves with these factories, these modern factories. And by the time you get to the 70s, the British steel mines, and I'm not even kidding you, some of these British workers were working in 19th century steel mills, man. Have a look at what I'm showing you on the screen. Would you want to work in one of these? By the 70s, you'd get British steelmakers who can no longer compete with people like Germans and the Japanese. So, you know, Britain's looking around and it's going, we just can't go. I mean, the politicians anyway, the upper classes in Britain are looking around and saying, we just can't compete with this anymore. And Britain needed a radical change, much like I think Britain needs a radical change today. Back in 79-80, it needed a radical change, and Thatcher's the one who comes and does this. One of the first things Thatcher does is dismantle exchange controls, right? So before Thatcher, right, you have to understand, before Thatcher, it wasn't impossible, but it was difficult to do business in Britain, especially by today's standards, because you had all these regulations in place. So if someone wanted to come and invest in a British company, well, more often than not, they would need permission from the Bank of England. And this would take time, maybe deliberately so, actually. This would take hella time. And Thatcher comes in and she looks at all these regulations and just like chops them all up and just goes, nah. We're going to open our country for business, and that's exactly what she does. And just very quickly before I go on, just look at the inflation rates in Britain during the 1970s. Look at 1975, man. It's 25%, and I know, look, it wasn't 25% throughout the entire thing, but you're averaging, like, look, I haven't done the average for this, but it's not good, man. You're averaging between 10 to 15% inflation during this time. Imagine that over the course of a freaking decade, man. I thought the 2020s were really bad. I think the time we're living in right now is really bad for inflation, and it is. I think in 2022, 2023, inflation hit like 9 to 10%, and I think it wasn't far off the year after. But the 1970s are hella bad, man. They're hella bad. And, you know, again, Thatcher was looking at this and thinking, we need to drastically change things. Right, so I'm looking at the FDI. So for those who don't know, FDI is foreign direct investment. Thatcher comes up and she removes regulations so that more people, more foreigners can start investing in Britain. If you look at the 1970s, FDI was averaging about $3.25 billion, okay? Come the 1980s, FDI is suddenly averaging about $10.67 billion. So Thatcher comes and she basically triples the amount of money coming into Britain during the 1980s, and this is something I actually applaud her for. Initially, this was actually quite a good move. You're going to see how it starts to hurt us in the long term later on in this video, but at first this was a great move. And you know, Thatcher comes and starts selling off kind of telecoms and energy and defense and loads of like utilities like water, rail and electricity as well. Some of the most famous companies she sold made public, by the way, were things like British Gas, BT, British Airways, British Steel. It was up to the public to buy shares in certain companies, and this would then put pressure on the companies to do well and deliver. They had to be efficient, they had to turn a profit, otherwise people would take their shares out and invest in other shares. And this was a really popular idea in the 1980s, back when you have Reagan and we're going to bring Reagan in a sec, but you know, during the 1980s, these Reagan and Thatcher are taking ideas from Milton Friedman, and I looked into Milton Friedman a little bit. Most famously known for like free market economics, which is basically hands off, let the market do its own thing and everything will be fine, which I find kind of funny because it doesn't really sound like a theory, it just sounds like someone being lazy, but still, that's what it is. The policies Thatcher introduces are called neoliberalism, and I can do an entire video on neoliberalism. I do intend to one day, okay? Brits could suddenly easily invest in other parts of the world, and most significantly for this story, other parts of the world were encouraged to invest in Britain, and no foreigner is more significant for this story than the United States. Now, at the time, the United States was ruled by Ronald Reagan, and just like Thatcher, he was on board with this entire neoliberal project. He wanted countries to open up their markets, to slash regulations, to slash protections, put down trade barriers, okay, no tariffs, none of that whatsoever, so that American companies, which were, you know, the most dominant in the world at this point, I would argue the most, were free to invade these countries essentially and get involved. In 1986, Thatcher unleashes the Big Bang, where she totally slashes regulations across London, and all of a sudden you get all the big boys, all the American like bankers coming into London. You got Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and all these bankers, these freaking like the guys basically coming into London and start that, you know, they're bankers, so they start lending money to all these businesses in the UK. And you know, the 1980s is often associated with extravagance and pomp and, you know, money as well, materialism. You know, this is the age in which Madonna had the song Material Girl, okay, right? And there's a reason for this, because cash was flowing like crazy during the 1980s. If you're like in a place like London, we don't usually talk about what's happening on. This is the thing with the 1980s. When most people think of the 1980s, when rich people think of the 1980s, they think of Gordon Gekko walking on a beach with one of those freaking brick phones. When a lot of other people think of the 1980s, they'll think of like some miner being like manhandled by a police in Orgreave or something and being like, help me, I'm losing my job. And this is the thing, like, the wealth gap increases massively during this time. I should put some data up on the screen, and it sells volumes for the time, because on the one hand, Thatcher gets money flowing into the country, and she gets business flowing as well. This is a great age for the entrepreneur, because when you get people like Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch coming into your country and lending you money, yeah, you're going to see it's like a stimulus, it's like an injection, like a hormone injection, and the economy suddenly sees a spike, and that's exactly what happened. You suddenly got money flowing like crazy. This is the age of electronic trading, which makes trading so much quicker. It's less personal. Yeah, it's to do with machines, and you've got transactions happening like that, and suddenly you see a boom in the economy, and it's great. I mean, I would have loved to have been a trader or a stockbroker in the 1980s. There's no coincidence that Martin Scorsese made The Wolf of Wall Street, and he really glamorizes that age, and I think it could have been almost as glamorous as that film if you were in the right profession, not if you're in the steel making industry or the shipbuilding industry. No, this is an age of extravagance and great divide between rich and poor, setting the precedent for what would come hereafter. I will get back to the story, but this is also the age in which, you know, you got films like Wall Street coming out, Gordon Gekko famously saying greed is good, which captures the spirit of the times. You've got Bonfire of the Vanities, okay, about the highs and lows of, I think, a trader as well. It's a great, but go read Bonfire of the Vanities if you haven't already. Oh, one of my favorites. And also, this is the age of my favorite Ferraris. So you got the Ferrari Testarossa, you got the Ferrari F40, and you got my personal favorite, which is the Ferrari 288 GT. Oh, look at this car. Oh my god. Like, you know, when you think of the 80s, you got to think of like some guy, maybe some like the cops from Miami Vice or something, with the, you know, really big shoulder pads lads on their Blazers and stuff sitting on one of those cars or something in Miami, because Miami's a up and coming, a booming city during the 1980s as well. So there's lots of stuff to be hyped for when it comes to the 1980s. And look, it's not all good. As I said before, the number of unemployed people in the UK actually increases. The number of strikes and subsequent days off increases. So the economy does actually go like this sometimes. And this is also the age in which private equity starts becoming a thing, okay? Private equity really booms in the 1980s. And look, I'm going to move on to private equity, because it's private. I don't think any industry has as bad a reputation as private equity, other than maybe the military-industrial complex. But private equity is right up there with having some of the worst reputations in the industry of finance, and maybe justifiably so. But I want to take a chance to say that private equity actually started off maybe not honorably, but it provided quite a vital service in the 1980s, where, you know, people in private equity would go up to companies and try to just optimize them and make them more profitable before selling them off to another owner. And this was actually kind of ideal in the 1980s. It wasn't actually that big a problem. It's later on, during the kind of maybe post 2008, that private equity becomes really freaking vulture-like and really quite bad in many, many cases. But we're going to move on to that in a bit. Guys, I really hope you're enjoying the show, by the way, so far. If you do, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you like and subscribe. And also, if you're getting a lot out of this video, just share it with the people. Share it with anyone who's into macroeconomics, geopolitics, and tech. I try and release these as often as possible, okay? And also, yeah, once you're done, Friday night, just check out what the red or black labels, guys. Those things are going to get better as this channel starts to take off. I can't wait, man. I can't, honestly. If you haven't checked out The Tragedy of Prince Faisal, go check out The Tragedy of Prince Faisal. It was my very first ever work of action, adventure, sci-fi, fantasy, and opera. It's done in a South Park style way, but and yes, the production can at times be a bit better, but the story is amazing, okay? It really is. So go check it out when you get some time. I'm going to move on because it is time for the story to move on. I love the 80s. I'd love to spend more time in this decade of Madonna and frickin' Michael Jackson, but and Rubik's Cubes. But we do need to move on, okay? And I'm going to skim through Major Lazer. That's what I call him. I'm a bit of a nerd. I will call John Major Lazer because I'm just that. I'm that guy. Major and Blair basically fulfill Thatcher's legacy. Blair, most famously, for taking the Labour Party, a left-wing party for the working class, and turning it into conservative light. I was still a kid in the 2000s, right? So I remember, you know, I wasn't around in the 80s. I don't know what it felt like. I can only imagine what it was like based on what I've seen and read. I was alive during the 2000s. I actually remember the 2000s, and I remember. And this is highly subjective because I was a kid, and when you're a kid, of course things are going to feel better because you're a dumb, naive kid where everything's wonderful, and it's like, but at the same time, I just remember, I do genuinely believe that things were better during the 2000s. I think people were richer, and you're going to see exactly why British people feel poorer later on in this video, okay? There's some very real reasons. I'm mainly looking at big tech, I'm mainly looking at multinationals, and I'm mainly looking at private equity, okay? These are the three things that Angus Hanton outlines in his book Vassal State, and he makes such a great case for it. And, you know, I want to be clear, like, I'm quite liberal, like, I'm not some, like, die-hard nationalist, but I do believe in the nation state as an entity, and I think what's happened to it is really quite tragic, but we're going to get into that in a bit. Let's get to the inflection point, guys, because I've been going on for quite some time. So, look, 2008 is the turning point. 2008 is, to this story, what the frickin' Nazguls and the black hooded figures in Lord of the Rings are to Frodo. You know, they're the thing that come into the town and really force Frodo to leave and go into the world beyond. And 2008 is that for the UK in this story. It's the moment when everything changes, because, you know, 2008 was the Great Recession. For those that don't know, a recession is when everything goes economically downhill, and this one was particularly bad because it was created by the banks in some way. They were giving out these subprime mortgages to people who really didn't deserve them, and before you know it, they can't collect them back, and the whole economy just goes haywire. There's tons of great videos on it. Go check one of them out, and maybe one day I'll release a video specifically on this crisis. But it's a huge moment in which, you know, America sneezes and the world catches a cold, basically. And again, I just want to be clear, like, recessions happen like every 7 to 10 years. It will inevitably happen, but this one was super, we call it the Great Recession. This one was really bad, and I'll tell you why, especially for Britain. Okay, it hit everyone really badly, but Britain was specifically hit bad because of what it did to the pound. You know, before 2008, I remember this, right? Before 2008, loads of British people during the summer or whatever it was would go to America because for £1 you would get $2, right? So you would take your pounds and you'd get twice as much for it as you would in Britain. Yeah, so many kids at my school would go to America, cover themselves in Abercrombie and Fitch, and come back like with smiles on their faces because of the amount of money they'd saved. The pound was so strong before 2008, one of the strongest currencies in the world. 2008 destroys the pound after the Great Recession. The pound becomes much weaker, whereas before the recession, £1 would get you roughly $2. After the recession, £1 would get you $1.38. And Americans are loving this. They're loving this because now they're getting more pounds for their dollars. And, you know, with all these British companies going bust after the recession, you know, Gordon Brown and then David Cameron later are looking at this going, how are we going to save these companies? We don't have the money. We need to sell them off. And who comes in other than America? Americans, you know, American entrepreneurs, arguably the most renowned entrepreneurs in the world, are looking at this and they're thinking, this is freaking gold for us. We can literally just buy all these British companies for very little money. And that's exactly what happens. So, you know, before you know it, all these famous British brands are being bought off by Americans. Like, you got freaking Waterstones. Like, if any company I thought would have stayed British, it would be Waterstones. But no, they were bought by a hedge fund. Then you got Boots being sold off. Weetabix, bro. Weetabix, Ready Break, and Alpen. This is just the start of the story, because this takes me into the analysis section of the video. This is now really significant. You clicked on this video because you wanted to know how America now owns Britain, and I'm about to tell you exactly why. I just want to be clear, America's takeover of Britain started before 2008. It was very subtle. No one was complaining because it was the era of globalization. We welcomed foreign investment and foreign ownership of our economy. It was a kind of a good thing because it meant more money coming in, right? But this globalization thing overlooked the importance of the nation state and national security and some degree of sovereignty. And that's what I'm about to get into now. So take an average British person's day out. Just wait until a Saturday and go out. Let's say you're walking and you just want to stop off at the corner shop and just get a snack to eat, right, before you continue. What are you buying? Let's say you go for a chocolate bar. What kind of chocolate bar are you getting? Cadbury's? Milka, Oreo, Toblerone, Mars, Galaxy, Maltesers? They're all American, bro. Let's say you want to get a drink as well. What drink are you getting? Tango, Fanta, Sprite, 7-Up, Pepsi, Coke? Let's say you don't want to stop at the coffee shop. Let's say you want to stop off for a coffee. Well, what coffee are you getting? Starbucks? Costa? American, bro. Owned by Americans. Let's say you don't want a coffee. Let's say you want to stop off and get something to eat. Well, where are you going to eat? McDonald's? KFC? Pizza Hut? You have to understand that every time you buy something from one of these American companies, some of the profits go back into the company, sure, and pay the staff in the UK and stuff. But most of the money, man, is going to some headquarters in freaking like California or someplace near. And it pays back American shareholders, right? And most of the shareholders in these companies are American, okay? And not necessarily all of them citizens either. They're taken up by freaking pension funds and asset managers, and you know, it's going to a lot of rich people in America. And that's happening with every single one of these American companies in our country. And again, I just want to be clear, I happily welcome foreign products. I think it's a wonderful thing, but the amount of money being taken and put into the pockets of just a few people is insane. I mean, you've also got to bear in mind that a lot of these countries, they don't pay tax here. They put it in offshore tax havens. And either the taxes go to America or they manage to get away with it. And when you think about the amount of wealth being extracted versus the amount coming back in, you can understand why British people are starting to feel poor, because none of it is coming back in the form of state provision. So of course you're going to drive down roads with potholes in them. Of course the NHS is going to be stripped bare. Of course you're not going to get trains that operate well because there's no money left. You know, a lot of these politicians, David Cameron, George Osborne, Kwasi Kwarteng, Gordon Brown. They all end up going and working for Americans after they're done, dude. I'll show you some of the data on screen, but it's really quite ghastly. And, you know, if we're going to come back to the story, this story just, it goes on and on and on. So let's say you're done with your day out. Let's say, before you come back home, what clothes you buying? What? Gap? Nike? Abercrombie and Fitch? Like, and again, some people say I'm being very partial because there are other brands from other countries and so on as well. But when you think of your classic go-to brands in so many things, start being mindful of it, and you'll be overwhelmed by how reliant you are on American products and goods and services. I haven't even got around to big tech and the private equity sector yet, but it's really quite something. You're surrounded by it. I mean, this show is Tommy Hilfiger. Like, I'm doing it right now. Let's say you're done with your day out, which was surrounded by American products, and you come back home and you think, you know, I'm finally home. I can finally get away from the American products. As if that's ever going through anyone's mind. I doubt it is. But let's say it was. And you sit on your couch like, I can relax. Let's get the TV on. What streaming services are you using? Disney Plus? Netflix? Amazon Prime? Apple TV? It goes on and on and on. Like, Netflix has 17 million subscribers in the UK. That's 58% of UK households are subscribed to Netflix. And then it's not just the money that they're making off us, dude. It's also the type, you know, with media, there's soft power as well. So they're very much influencing how we think, what we see, what we're exposed to. How do you use the internet, right? What are you on? Google, ChatGPT, Facebook, Instagram? They're all making money off ads, man. The money that UK newspapers used to make from advertisements. I'm talking about like Daily Mail, Daily Express, The Sun, whatever. These silicon pirates are now making that money, dude. They're the ones. If you've got a newspaper, you have to get big off one of their platforms. And on top of that, they don't pay digital services tax here, dude. Every time we've tried to push it on them, they've gone, no, you don't. In 2018, Philip Hammond introduced the digital services tax, and it was only meant to be applied to the biggest 30 tech companies. And there was this Democratic senator called Ron Wyden in July 2019 who said a trade agreement between, this is post-Brexit, by the way, a trade agreement between the US and the UK will not happen with your digital services tax, period. Okay, and this was then supported by Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, who said if countries choose to collect or adopt such taxes, the United States will respond with appropriate commensurate measures. In January 2020, the French were forced to scale back their DST, their digital services tax, after the United States threatened to place 100% tariffs on their food and wine. And these people, Britain and France, they all just cave, man. They all just cave because there's nothing they can do. This is how powerful big tech is, bro. And again, I'm super grateful for using big tech. I use big tech all the time. I'm using it right now on my Apple computer. This is the thing. Like, you may be even skeptical of everything I'm telling you. Well, why don't you look it up, guys? Why don't you look it up on Google or your Apple iPhone? As British citizens, we're free. We're in a global economy, so we're free to invest in the US stock market and make something back. But realistically, it's only the wealthiest Brits that will do that. Most of this is going to Americans, dude. And as I said earlier, that the pension funds and the asset managers and the people who are already super established, they're the ones making a killing from this type of economy. Really, truly. I saw this one article in Foreign Affairs which talked about the inequality myth, and I was like, that can't be true. That can't be true at all. I mean, if you disagree with what I'm saying, by all means, guys, let me know in the comments below. I'm always open to seeing more data. But, you know, Ray Dalio and Joseph Stiglitz and so many people have supported what I'm saying, which is the inequality gap is huge. And I'm willing to bet that comes down to this globalized economy, this neoliberal age we're coming out of right now. Also, how are you making these transactions? What are you using? You're not using cash. Cash used to be a thing back in 2010, which literally it was like a 50-50 split. Today, it's like 90-10, maybe even more than that. And what cards are you using? Are you using MasterCard, Visa? Both owned by Americans, bro. And as people stop using cash, the credit card people can up their fees. Every time you use a credit card, dude, these credit card providers are taking a slice, dude. And it's non-stop, dude. They can increase their fees as much as they want. I think MasterCard puts the interest up to 25%. That's how much, and British people are amongst are the highest when it comes to taking out debt to spend on. We've lost out the most in some ways during this neoliberal era. with all these American companies that dominate us. It's non-stop. It's Deliveroo, okay, for your food, or Just Eat. It's Expedia for your holidays. When you want to sell your house, it's Zoopla. You know, I spoke earlier about, you know, X and Instagram and Facebook and Google and ChatGPT and all these things. And then if you look at the cloud providers, okay, the very people that allow us to use the internet, it's AWS by Amazon, and then Google and Microsoft own the rest, okay? Amazon alone provides 40% of our clouding infrastructure, dude. Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, and who's the Microsoft guy? Satya, I forgot his name. But Microsoft, Amazon, and Google could single-handedly just destroy our economies just like that. They could destroy our economies just like that, just by turning the cloud infrastructure off. So when Keir Starmer goes and pretends to get something from Trump, there's nothing he can get, realistically. Why do you think Britain was the first to cave? It's not because Trump's this really nice guy giving us a really nice deal, just because of that special relationship, which, by the way, Americans laugh at us, bro. Back in 2009, right? Gordon Brown, yeah? Do you remember Gordon Brown? For those that don't know, Gordon Brown was the guy in between Tony Blair and David Cameron. And, you know, he wrote in the Sunday Times, like, oh yeah, this relationship, it's so special, can't wait. Goes up to Obama. Obama doesn't even have time to have a proper lunch with him. He has to, like, what was it he had to cancel? He had to cancel a press conference. And, you know, for the gifts, Brown gives him, like, this first edition Winston Churchill biography and a pen holder carved from the wood of the HMS Gannon. And Obama just basically gives him, like, this box set of old Hollywood movies, which can't even be played in the UK because of, like, the region lock. Obama had this really close advisor called Jeremy Shapiro. And this is a quote from him. He's one of Obama's closest advisors, and he was basically laughing at us behind the scenes. He literally said, from my perspective, it was very important for us to mention the special relationship in every press conference when the UK people were here. But really, we laughed about it behind the scenes. When you look at just how indebted we are to America, just how much control they have over our economy, through the multinationals, through big tech, and through private equity, you start to understand why they're laughing at us, guys. You know, why is it that Nick Clegg, our deputy prime minister, but alas, our prime minister, goes and works for Mark Zuckerberg when he's done? He doesn't stay in Britain and pioneer some new development here. He goes and works for Zuck. And credit to Zuck, credit to Musk for doing these, for innovating and creating the products that we now are dependent on. As always, I champion the entrepreneur and I champion the innovators. But have some freaking backbone. But it has our lack of protection. This is the thing. Major, Blair, Brown, Cameron, and all the prime ministers that came after Cameron as well, who lasted like a year. They were all fulfilling Thatcher's legacy. These are all children of Thatcher's. You know, let's open everything up. Let's leave ourselves vulnerable. It's okay because at least the money will be coming in. No, we've become a spineless country. So when Farage comes out and makes these populist rants, I can understand why so many people support him, though I don't know if Farage is the answer. Bezos controls 40 to 50% of the UK's cloud storage. I was like, this guy, man, honestly, like, I was looking at Bezos earlier this year, man. Do you remember when he was, like, standing next to, like, you know, Sundar Pichai and, like, Elon Musk and all them tech bros at Trump's inauguration? And I was like, I get that this guy's rich, but how is he the second richest man in the world for just, like, selling parcels? Like, selling parcels is great, and I can understand why that would make him rich. But second richest guy in the world, and it's when I found out about AWS and how he practically controls a big chunk of the world's internet that I was like, oh, right, I get it now. I get why Jeff Bezos is making a freaking killing, man. Before I end, I want to discuss private equity and recent developments too. So I'm talking about Brexit, I'm talking about post-Brexit, I'm talking about COVID, and I'm talking about post-COVID, and all the way up to Trump as well. So with private equity, you've got some very successful companies, okay? I think out of the top 20 private equity firms in the world, 17 are American. I spoke about these guys earlier, and it's become a real problem since 2008, okay? So I'm not saying private equity hasn't had success stories post-2008. I think they have. So apparently they did quite a good job with Burger King, for example, where they genuinely went in restructured that company, and then sold it off for a profit, and also set it off on better grounds, okay, and genuinely optimized it and made it better. But all too often now, we're seeing private equity companies come in, ravish companies, and just leave. It's like they come in, they take out debt, not on their behalf, but they take out debt on behalf of the company. They start paying themselves. They strip the company of the cash flow and the assets, basically. They take all the profit the company was going to make, pocket it, and then walk off and leave the company to die, basically. We're seeing that so often. It most famously happened in the UK with Toys R Us. I think Toys R Us was one of the first post-2008 victims of the vulture capitalists aspect of private equity. But it's happening again and again with all these companies I'm showing up on screen, bro. It's also happening in places like care homes and high streets and housing estates and infrastructure and transport. I think private equity will have to be its own video one day, by the way. It's so interesting to look into. We had this company called Silent Night, which was a UK company which emerged after World War II. I think it sold like beds or something like that, and you got this Miami-based HIG Capital company that came around and totally destroyed the company, ransacked its pensions, and reduced pensions for all those people who used to work for the company. So this is really vulture capitalism at its absolute worst, by the way. I'm gonna start ending this video, but guys, the story hasn't been great. I think America, it knows how much it owns our economy, and as a result, it can practically do what it wants with us. We are, I'm sorry, but in some ways, we are a satellite of America. I think it started getting worse after 2008. Remember when Barack Obama came to London? I think it was like in 2016, and he said, if Britain leaves the EU, it will be at the back of the queue. In fairness to Obama, he did it very diplomatically. It wasn't like in a Trump-like way where he was being really assertive or really like controversial with it. He said it in a very politically correct, decent way. He said, as your friend, and he did it whilst respecting our sovereignty. As your friend, it is my duty to tell you also how this is going to affect us. And he said, if Britain leaves the EU, it will be at the back of the queue. But the very fact that he was saying that, he was willing to come out into the UK and say that, just shows he has no reservations about just making himself, expressing what he would like us to do. He has very few reservations about saying that. And, after Brexit, it was very difficult. He wasn't lying. Obama was true. I mean, after Brexit, Britain couldn't get an easy trade deal with the United States. It still hasn't, actually, up to this point. They couldn't get it with Trump. They couldn't get it with Biden. And now that Trump's come back, maybe something could happen. But do you honestly believe that trade deal is going to be favorable to us? When COVID happened, we neglected our own domestic industries in order to bring in Americans. There was some really great companies set up just to help us manage COVID. They had the supplies and so on, and Britain just goes to the Americans because God knows why, but that's what they did. And it's getting to a point where we're just constantly putting the interests of America above our own domestic industries. Again, why do you think so many British people feel dissatisfied? The neoliberal project hasn't worked out for them. Why do you think they're turning to Farage? Everyone's like, oh, how dare they? They must be stupid. No, they're not stupid. You're the stupid one for turning a blind eye, for overlooking this, for putting your assets in offshore accounts for far too long. And again, I consider myself quite neoliberal, actually, in some ways. I believe in enterprise and turning a profit and capitalism. I like these things. But it has got ridiculous now, obscenely so. Britain's selling off companies to do with its national security to the Americans. It sold off Arm to the Japanese bank SoftBank, and then SoftBank was then going to go off and sell it to the Americans. Now Britain developed a little bit of a backbone and said no to that. But Britain sold off DeepMind. Britain sold off DeepMind to Google. This was back in 2014 when it sold DeepMind for $400 million with no questions asked by the government. And this is now going on to construct Google's AI platform. Can you imagine how much money we would have made if we just held on to that? People will applaud Starmer for how well he did in America, but when you look at things systematically, when you look at the state of Britain's economy and just how dependent it is on America, well, look, the best thing Starmer did was a performance. It was theatre. Realistically, if America asks us to jump, realistically, Britain will simply say how high. Much of the world right now is reordering itself. It's looking elsewhere for deals and profits and trade. And I think Britain's the only one to come out clearly and go behind and back America and fall in line with America. I think this was made official with Starmer's statements and Peter Mandelson's statements about, oh, we should be scared of China now. Like, no, dude, you're saying this, you're just trying to cover up for the fact that we have become a satellite to America and all that name. I was thinking about this the other day. Why don't we just become part of America? Because we practically already are in many ways part of America. I know people will point to Britain's role with the EU and maybe that can give us some leverage, but in many ways, dude, we are a satellite. We should just, in some ways, why don't we just become the 51st state? We'd get lower tax. I mean, let me know in the comments below if you disagree, and if you do, I happily welcome that. But if you haven't already, do go check it out. It was a great read, and a very damning portrait of what Britain's become, and a great way of highlighting why so many people in Britain are feeling frustrated today. I could talk about the Huawei flip as well, and how America really does dominate our politics as well. But I've already covered that in a previous video on Inside the US-China Tech War, so go check that one out after this one. Guys, many thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this episode, then do give a thumbs up. If you're new here, subscribe. World Order covers all things geopolitics, macroeconomics, and tech. I also do the World Order red and black labels for those who want to check out storytelling of a more highly produced format. So do go check those out. And guys, yeah, leave a comment in the options below. I can't wait to hear from you. And I'll be back again very soon. Okay, so yeah, take care. Bye-bye.